And I gave it a shot. Didn't work. I found a mysterious reel of 16 I was going to transfer, but guess what? It didn't work out. There were some film breaks that I'm going to have to repair. Anyhow, I'm Skip Elsheimer. Welcome to the AV Geeks lunchtime streaming show, where we sometimes scan and stream at the same time, and so we have technical problems like this, and I appreciate most of you are okay with that. Some of you are probably like, why is he doing that? Like, why doesn't he prep the films before, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's just not how we do it over here. So perhaps basketball and dental hygiene don't seem like they're related, but this film is really trying to make it mesh it. So here's Portrait of the Enemy.
You gotta play good defense. We're not gonna have a chance. They try to get the ball inside. They don't like to take outside shots. If you play tight defense, you could win the game. If you don't, they're gonna beat us, I can tell you now.
In order to win the game, it is absolutely essential to understand how the opposition plays the game and to predict the design. The subject of this short film is periodontal disease, the enemy. What happened and why? Is it inevitable or is there a choice? This is plaque, the beginning. Plaque, the primary cause of tooth decay. Plaque, the major cause of tooth loss in children, and of gum disease and tooth loss in adults. Plaque, a soft, sticky, colorless film of bacteria that is constantly forming on teeth. Using the sugar in food, plaque produces acids and other irritants that attack the tooth enamel. The sticky plaque then forms and holds the acids on the teeth, prolonging the attack and allowing decay to begin. The irritants present in plaque inflame the gums, making them tender and likely to bleed. If plaque is not removed by careful daily cleaning, it builds up. The irritated gums pull away from the teeth, leaving pockets that become filled with more bacteria and pus. In the end, healthy teeth become loose and may be lost. Portrait of an Enemy. Plaque, the beginnings of periodontal disease.
Good defense, help out, Sam! Take away the pride. Good help, Wayne, that's it. That's what you gotta do tomorrow. You gotta help out when the guy's driving. That's all they're gonna do tomorrow is drive on you. If you don't help out, we're gonna get beaten. Help out, we're gonna win.
To succeed against any opponent, it is valuable to understand the cost of losing. The facts are disturbing. A third of our population between the ages of 15 and 19 have an early form of periodontal disease called gingivitis. In the ages between 18 and 24, 2/3 suffer from gingivitis and 10% have destructive periodontal disease. In maturity and middle age, between the ages of 45 and 54, fully 5/6 of our population has gingivitis, and over 1/3 suffer from destructive periodontal disease. In the later years, the figures tell their own story. 90% give evidence of periodontal disease. Why? The answer is not complicated. It is contained in a single word: neglect. Poor and careless home dental care. Poor nutrition and diet. A lack of regular professional care. It all adds up to neglect in one form or another.
We have to know who the guys on the other team, on Brewster, what they can do, what they can't do in order to defeat them. We want the ball to be passed over here, right, Dave? We want it here.
Victory begins with recognizing the opponent and his style of play. The cause is known. The symptoms can be recognized. Gums that bleed easily when brushing or flossing. Persistent bad breath. Soft, swollen, or tender gums. Pus between the gums and the teeth. Loose teeth. Gums that recede from the teeth. And changes. Changes in the way the teeth come together, in the spaces between the teeth, in the way partial dentures fit. Individually and together, they tell a simple story: periodontal disease. And yet, it is not inevitable. It is not a fact of life and of living that we are powerless to change. Often, the course of the game and the outcome is determined by the defense and by how soon we stop an opponent's attack. This is often the difference between winning and losing. The disease can be prevented. Not a single tooth need be lost to this enemy, to periodontal disease, if we begin at the beginning, at home, with ourselves as the guardians of our oral health. Daily flossing and brushing, a little extra time and attention, removing the plaque that forms every day, removing it before it has a chance to harden. In almost every mouth, there are traps in which it is easy for plaque to gather and work. Worn out fillings and crowns, partial dentures and crowded teeth, broken edges of decayed teeth. The more careful and conscientious the home care, the less opportunity there will be for plaque to form. Break it up, remove it, disperse it, every day. This is the beginning of good oral health. Beyond good home care, there is the matter of nutrition and diet. A sound diet based on principles of good nutrition is necessary to maintain the health of the gums and bones that support the teeth. Sugar helps create plaque. So the less sugar, The less plaque, the less chance of periodontal disease.
I'm going to do a clinical examination just to make sure that...
And finally, regular periodic dental checkups. A chance for the dentist and his professional staff not only to look carefully at the mouth and the teeth, but also to chart and supervise a total program designed to achieve a lifetime of oral health.
So you feel the resistance. Then you take the floss and curve it to the side of the tooth to a C shape, and gently up and down.
Victory is often decided by how well we play during the entire game, from start to finish. Born as this sticky, colorless substance, formed and allowed to grow through neglect, the enemy grows powerful and dangerous. The alternatives seem clear.
Sorry, that was horrible. I looked over, I was trying to get the hunting film to work, and then I looked over and I was like, oh. So, sorry about your lunch. But cautionary tale about basketball. Alright, I'm trying to get this scanner to work, and it's just misbehaving today. I don't know what's going on. But maybe we should watch something that's not so problematic. Or maybe it's problematic in another way. This is Frontier Boy of the early Midwest. Enjoy.
Reading offers great pleasure. Willie, we only ask you to attend school 30 weeks out of the year. Now, that's not too much, is it?
No, sir.
So a boy can hardly afford to miss 2 weeks in a row, especially with a spelling bee coming up.
I know, Mr. Rogers, but I was needed at home. My pa broke his collarbone. Log come down on him, and he can't do much with just one arm.
Well, tell your father I hope he's better soon, for his sake. And for your sake, too. Willie, I want you at that spelling bee next week.
I liked going to school. I liked Mr. Alexander Rogers. He told us ciphers were the most important thing you could learn. Know 'em, and you could grow up to be a surveyor and earn $30 a month. Being able to spell correctly, Mr. Rogers said, was a sure sign of an educated person. You could read books and write letters and essays and maybe even become president someday. Everybody was dying to be in the spelling contest, as much for the prizes as for the honor of winning. After school, we'd all hurry down to Mr. Peabody's store, where the prizes were kept. For the boys, it was a genuine squirrel gun. For the girls, the prize was a real spinning wheel. I guess I never wanted anything so much as that gun. All the way home, 3 miles, I'd practice spelling words, like Indiana, I-N-D-I-A-N-A, which is the state we live in, and flatboat, F-L-A-T-B-O-A-T, which is how my pa and all the men take their corn and hogs and things they want to sell to the big market towns. Over the river's the best way. By wagon takes too long, and there aren't hardly any roads anyway. Peddlers come by a few times a year, selling pots and pans and cloth made back east. And there are always new families moving west from places back there, too. People hereabouts are dreadful glad to welcome the new neighbors and get the news about what's going on in the world outside Indiana. Neighbors got to help each other out here. My pa says, if you're not willing to help, you got no... You can't clear fields by yourself, or build a house, or harvest a crop of corn. My pa first planted corn before I was born. Came out from New England and bought land from the government at $2 an acre. Plant corn even before building a house. That's the way it's done. Our house, which we're sure proud of, is made of hewn logs, cut square. My folks started with just a little cabin, kept fixing it up and adding to it. Now we even got window glass and board floors. Most of the furniture Pa made himself. Other pieces he traded for at the market town. It seems like what Pa doesn't make, Ma does. She makes the Johnny cake from cornmeal, preserves, quilts and bedding, and all our clothes. She makes soap out of tallow, wood ashes, and lots of stirring. My sister makes the butter. She takes the milk out of the spring house and pours it into the churn. The cream gets thicker and thicker with the churning, and pretty soon it's butter. We don't eat the chickens unless they're extra numerous, else we wouldn't have any eggs. I do the milking twice a day, now that Pa can't use his arm. Cutting and loading the hay is one of the biggest jobs of the year. Pa's been worried about getting it in before the next rain. Got to have enough hay on hand to feed the stock through the winter. While the corn's growing, we have to keep it cultivated, lest the weeds choke out the corn. Most everything we eat, aside from salt and sugar, we raise ourselves. I don't mind the plowing and cultivating so much, but splitting rails for fences and chopping wood for the cook fire sure does get tiresome, though I'd never like Pa to think I didn't want to do it. If our fire goes out, I go over to a neighbor's, get a light from their fire, and carry it home. Easier than making a new one ourselves out of flint. Not much time for practicing the words. But chores just don't wait on a person. You surely do get tired by nighttime.
Government.
Government. G-O-V-E-R-N-M-E-N-T. Government.
It's a sorry state when a boy is forced to do a man's work.
The grist mill is where our corn is ground into meal. Every few weeks, we haul a few sacks of corn into Mr. Daniels, the miller. He's about the most important person around because everyone depends on him for grinding their corn. Mr. Daniels pours the corn from the sacks into the hopper. The big wheel outside is turned by water from the river falling over it. It turns the other wheels and gears and things inside. Never could figure out why it takes so many wheels, but I guess it does. The corn drops down from the hopper and goes between the grindstones. Out comes the yellow cornmeal, ready to be made into Johnny cake or flapjacks or corn dodgers. If it weren't for the mill, we'd have to grind the corn by hand, the way the Indians do. We take back home what we need and arrange to ship the rest to the market towns by flatboat. That's one way. Another way, feed it to the hogs and the corn carries itself to the market. The men go hunting from time to time, for deer or turkey mostly, so we can have other meat besides pork. Pa let me come, since he couldn't shoot with only one arm. But all I got was a couple of old crows.
That was a perfect shot, Willie. You ought to have a squirrel rifle of your own.
I aim to have me one, Mr. Haverly. I surely do. Except aiming and having are two different things. On the day of the spelling bee, when it seemed like everybody in southern Indiana was in town, we had to stop by the store and attend to some trading. Hardly any real money is used. Mr. Nagel, the storekeeper, sets the price. So much corn or so many eggs for a yard of cotton material. And Ma figures out what we can afford. It was a genuine squirrel gun. I guess I never wanted anything so much as that gun. Everybody sure seemed interested in the spelling bee, though they weren't here just to see it. This was a celebration day, having to do with our territory being a state now. And the spelling bee was just part of the doings. There was a shooting match for the men, with some of the best shots in the territory here. There were games like Red Rover and Run Sheep Run for the kids. The women make quilts and sell them to raise money for the church. Never could see why it takes so many ladies to make one old quilt. But making quilts is as much for talking as anything else. There's enough talking in a day to last 7 months full of Sundays. They got Annalise Cooper and Jim Bob Rutherford practically married, and they haven't no more than barely met. Hathaway's just too bossy to abide, and they're forever talking about her. A town festival gives the men a good chance to visit the blacksmith shop, to get the horses shod, and make trades for tools and implements. Mr. Kindred, the blacksmith, makes everything himself. Wagon wheels, sickles, saws, files, even wolf traps. A good axe costs $4, a rifle about $30. At the meeting house, the men talk about the price of corn in New Orleans, or who they should send to Washington to represent us. Finally, when I couldn't stand the wait any longer, it was time for the spelling bee to get started. I kept thinking, Maybe it'd been better if I'd stayed home. There were boys here from all over this part of Indiana. You could tell the good spellers a mile away. The girls had their contest first for the spinning wheel prize. Then it was our turn. Mr. Alexander Rogers gave us the words. Mr. Edward Lucas, who was a judge in real life, said whether the words were spelled right or not. Miss a word, you sit down, and the last boy standing wins. You keep hoping you won't get a word you never heard of, or a word you can't figure out by sounding it. Finally, there were just two left standing. Me and a boy from upriver named of Robert Murdoch.
Willie McLaren, Liberty.
Liberty. L-I-B-E-R-T-Y. Liberty.
Robert Murdoch, Improvement.
Improvement. I-M-P-R-O-V-E-M-E-N-T. Improvement.
Willie McLaren, Constitution.
Constitution. C-O-N-S-T. C-O-N-S-T-I-T. U-T-I-O-N. Constitution.
Robert Murdoch, Independence.
Independence. I-N-D-E-P-E-N-D-A-N-C-E. Independence.
That is incorrect.
Incorrect.
I'm proud to present this fine weapon to Willie McLaren, who's proved he's not only a boy who can spell, but a man as big as any man on the frontier.
Rupert Murdoch, he's that old? No. Robert Murdoch, not the same. And Johnny Cakes, delicious. All right, so, excuse me, I have a film set up on the scanner, and I have I had a stack of these untitled films, and this one on the inside, it said, When Magoo Flew. But I don't think that's what this is. I looked a little bit at the beginning of it, and I think I see a frog. So we're going to call it Untitled Frog Film. Enjoy.
Will sometimes release a white fluid from glands in the skin. Although this fluid may be quite poisonous to small animals, it is relatively harmless to man. Handling a toad will not cause warts. The tree frogs, or tree toads, are a third kind of tailless amphibian. These little animals, usually 1 inch to 2 inches long, are able to walk up a pane of glass. They do this with the aid of sticky suction pads on the tips of their long toes. They are called tree frogs because they are frequently found on trees, shrubs, and tall grasses.
Frogs and toads are closely related. The fat animal on the left is a western toad. The thinner animal on the right is a bullfrog. The frog usually has a narrower waist. Its skin is frequently smooth and moist. The toes of a frog are webbed to help it swim. Frogs are usually found in and around water. The feet of a toad are not webbed as much as a frog's. It lives in drier places. The toad's skin is covered with small bumps. In their adult stages, the tailless amphibians breathe mainly with lungs. They breathe through nostrils, much as we do. Air is forced in and out of the body by movements of the throat. The eye of an amphibian is protected by a membrane, a kind of third transparent eyelid. The membrane covers the eye when the animal is underwater, yet allows it to see. The other major group of amphibians are those with tails. These are called salamanders. Some, but not all salamanders, spend part of their lives in water, developing from tadpoles, just as the frogs, toads, and tree frogs do. These salamanders are commonly called newts. Although salamanders look very much like lizards, it is easy to tell them apart. The skin of a salamander is smooth and without scales. Salamanders never have more than 4 toes on their front feet. Some salamanders, like this tree salamander, lay their eggs on damp soil. They do not go through a tadpole stage, and they never develop lungs. They breathe or absorb oxygen directly through their skins. They seldom go near water. Some salamanders, like this siren, live their lives entirely in water. The siren has 2 small front legs only. It breathes by means of bushy gills just in front of its 2 tiny legs, and it keeps these external gills all its life. If you look along the banks or in the water of freshwater streams, you will probably find members of the backboned animals called amphibians. There are 2 major groups of these animals. One group, those without tails, includes the frogs, the toads, and the tree frogs. They usually live their early lives in water, breathing with gills, and their adult lives on land, breathing mainly with lungs. Most go through a tadpole stage. The other group of amphibians, those with tails, are salamanders. Some, like this western newt, go through a gill-breathing tadpole stage. They breathe with lungs as adults. Some salamanders, like this tree salamander, may live entirely on land, breathing through their skins. They do not go through a tadpole stage. Still other salamanders, like this siren, live entirely in water, breathing with gills throughout life. Because most amphibians, like this western toad, eat insects during their adult lives, they are of great value. If you are lucky enough to have a toad in your garden, don't harm it or drive it away. Amphibians are harmless, and they help to keep the world free of harmful insects. They are good friends to man.
I like that little thing at the end for the Cleveland Visual Education Department. Yeah, so that's Film Associates. Is it about amphibians? I don't know. I'm going to have to look it up. So maybe we'll have a name for it by the time we're finished with this next film. And I'm going to make sure I haven't shown this. I don't think I have. Yeah, so this next film is animated, and it's about spark plugs. For some reason, I was collecting a lot of films about spark plugs from somebody on eBay who was selling a bunch of films about spark plugs. And I don't know why, I just was into it. And so this one was interesting to me because it was animated, and I can't help but think that the main character in this is Rat Fink. It just has that feeling. So here is Spark in Time on the Firing Line. Enjoy.
Today, we're going to take a look inside the modern motor car because the Champion Spark Plug Company would like to present A Spark in Time on the Firing Line. First, if we can get the car engine out where we can all see it. I mean see inside the engine. A cutaway. Thank you. We can now see a basic purpose of the ignition system, that of producing the spark. Spark, please. That ignites the fuel charge in the combustion chamber. Once more, please. The ignition system must also time this spark accurately, making sure that each piston is pushed down at just the right moment to get maximum power and efficiency. Now, this appears to be a pretty simple assignment, but the job keeps getting tougher as demands increase for engines with more and more power. Faster, able to handle long stretches of turnpike driving at high speeds, pulling heavier and heavier loads. Yet operating economically and reliably. All this means that with higher engine compression ratios, it requires higher voltages to push a spark through greater extremes of pressure. And today's high compression engines must operate through a tremendous range of temperatures, from the melting heat of a long mountain pull to sub-zero winter starting. 12,000 sparks must be triggered for each mile an 8-cylinder car travels. This means that at high speeds, each spark plug must work perfectly, up to 40 times each second, too fast to see in its machine gun rapidity. And each one of these sparks must be precision timed to an unvarying tolerance of 1/10,000th of a second. No wonder that to get the full efficiency designed into our modern engines, ignition systems must be maintained and serviced properly with good modern equipment backed up by adequate knowledge. What's more, all components of the ignition system must be of top quality. Not only the spark plugs, which operate under great extremes of voltage, temperature, and pressure in a current, but all the parts which work to supply the plugs with their sparking voltage. For the spark plug doesn't make the electricity. That's the job of the rest of the ignition system. Hey, what are you... Oh, you're getting the ignition parts out so you can arrange them in a simple diagram. The battery is the source of electricity in practically all automotive ignition systems. To make a circuit, we need electricity to its destination and a return path to complete the circuit. To simplify wiring, connections are grounded to the engine or frame, and this can always be assumed even though it isn't shown. Of course, this circuit will not work, since car batteries have 6 or 12 volts available, while a minimum pressure of about 5,000 volts is required to push a spark across the spark plug gap. That is why the ignition coil is so important. It has the job of taking the low battery voltage and transforming it into high voltage, high enough to spark across the gap. To make it work, a switching device is needed in the low voltage or primary circuit. When it is on, the low voltage flows through the primary windings in the coil, building up a magnetic field. When the current is switched off, this magnetic field collapses, cutting across the secondary coil windings. This action builds a high voltage in the secondary, whatever is needed, up to 30,000 volts to jump the spark gap. Of course, this all happens extremely fast, and many times each second. Switching the low voltage circuit on and off is part of the job of the distributor, which contains all the mechanically moving parts of the ignition system. Hooked into the low voltage circuit, the breaker points make and break the primary current, a timing switch, which is synchronized to the engine's rotation by this revolving cam. To eliminate arcing across the breaker points as they open, a condenser is added, which serves as an electronic spring or shock absorber, soaking up unneeded current. This also helps the magnetic field collapse more rapidly. Here now is a workable ignition system for a 1-cylinder engine. But most engines have 4, 6, or 8 cylinders. We'll make it 4 in this case to keep it simple. So we need 4 plugs, each to be fired at a different time in proper sequence. This is the function of the distributor, that of distributing the high voltage from the coil to the right plug at the correct moment. The lead from the coil goes into the center of the cap, connecting to a rotor, which directs the high voltage to each plug in its turn. Since each spark plug fires every other engine revolution in a 4-cycle engine, the rotor and cam turn at 1/2 engine speed. To spread the power impulses evenly, each engine is designed with a definite firing sequence. The rotor fires the plugs in this 1, 3, 4, 2 sequence, for instance, in most 4-cylinder engines. And of course, each plug must reliably get the fire going 7 to 40 times each second, while fighting off punishing pressure blows, searing blasts of heat, corrosive burning gases, and other corrosive deposits which try to short out the high voltage charges and prevent them from jumping the gap. All right, no guillotines. A spark plug leads a tough enough life as it is without overdoing it. And it's certainly no wonder, with all of the extreme conditions under which spark plugs must do their job, that spark plug people must spend so much time developing special electrode alloys, which will stand up under electrical erosion, chemical corrosion, and heat attack. Seals which hold permanently and prevent leakage from extreme pressures. Ceramic insulator materials which can withstand heat shock and high voltages while conducting heat away from the firing tips, and all the other features which give modern-day spark plugs their tremendous dependability. And there must be many different kinds of plugs, designed especially for different types of engines, different sizes, different heat ranges, and a variety of special requirements. And those who want the best in quality know when it's time to change their spark... it's time to change the subject. Speaking of timing, the ignition system not only has to get the spark to the right cylinder, but it must get it there precisely at the right instant to complete burning of the fuel charge, just as the piston has passed the top of its stroke and is starting down. This timing will give the maximum power push from the expanding gases. If ignition is timed too soon and the piston is going up when it meets the power push coming down, disagreement over direction results. And if ignition is timed too late, the push power of the expanding gases is wasted.
right, coffee break's over. Let's get back to work. Though the spark must be timed to the precisely right moment, that moment isn't always the same. So we'll make a simple graph to show, when running at low speed, how much time is taken up by the spark, combustion, and the push of expanding gases, all of which take a fixed amount of time to occur. This is slowed down considerably, of course. When correctly timed, sparking comes soon enough so that combustion is completed at or near the top of the piston stroke. Top dead center, it's called. So the maximum power push coincides with the piston's thrust downward. It's the setting of when the points open that controls spark timing, since this opens the primary circuit, so the magnetic field in the coil will collapse and build a sparking voltage in the secondary circuit. Moving the points changes the timing of when they're opened by the cam. Moving them too far against the cam's direction of rotation will make them open sooner, advancing spark timing to where power is lost. Retarding the spark timing too far also wastes power. So correct basic ignition timing at idling speed is set with a timing light to get the maximum power push. But what if we speed up the engine without changing the spark timing? Since it takes just as long for spark, combustion, and power push to take place, the faster the engine rotates, the more the spark should be advanced. Some means must be provided for changing the timing to suit different speeds and conditions, an automatic spark advance. There are several ways of doing this, each based on changing the relationship of the points in the cam by devices sensitive to the engine's performance. The automatic spark advance only works as needed and doesn't affect basic timing, which remains the same once it is set. It's worth noting that breaker point spacing will affect timing. Each manufacturer specifies settings for what is known as cam or dwell angle, the number of degrees of cam rotation during which the points dwell or remain closed. Adjusting the points to a wider gap decreases this dwell angle. This advances the timing since the points open sooner, and there isn't enough time for the primary circuit to build a good magnetic field in the coil. Narrowing the gap between the points increases the dwell angle, and timing is retarded since the points will open later. If the points are too close together, they carry too much current and tend to burn. That's why careful setting this precise mechanism is so important to good ignition performance. Here now is the working ignition system. Battery to store low voltage electricity, coil to transform low voltage to high voltage, breaker points to time the collapse of the coil's magnetic field, with a condenser to help it collapse faster, advanced mechanisms to adjust spark timing to conditions, rotor to dispatch the high voltage to the correct cylinder, and spark plugs to fire the fuel mixture. And we should add an ignition switch for turning the system on and off, and perhaps some sort of resistor in the primary circuit, such as are used in many 12-volt systems to cut down the voltage after permitting a higher voltage for starting. These should be included if for no other reason than to remind us they too should be checked as possible culprits if the ignition system isn't working properly. Oh, and one more thing. To suppress radio and electronic interference, ignition systems have resistance built into the ignition circuit, in the distributor, in the ignition leads, or inside the spark plugs themselves. As long as they are in good condition and operating correctly, they have no effect on engine performance. Now let's take a look at the ignition system in another way. All elements of the system, except for the spark plugs, are concerned with providing sufficient voltage at the right time, the job of making voltage available. The spark plugs use this voltage, and their condition determines the voltage required. To relate these two basic functions, we need a graph. No, get him out of here. I said graph. This scale represents voltage from 0 to 30,000 volts. A typical 12-volt ignition system that's new or in excellent condition will make up to 30,000 volts available to the spark plugs, while brand new plugs require about 5,000 volts to produce a spark that will jump the gap. The difference between voltages available and required is the reserve strength of the system. You might call it a laziness factor, since like a strong man or a super mouse who can lift his own weight but doesn't use any more strength than he has to, an ignition system does not produce any more voltage than is needed to push the spark across the gap between the plug electrodes. However, sudden acceleration increases voltage requirements sharply. Ignition systems in top condition have plenty of reserve to handle these sudden loads. But as plugs are used, the electrodes wear and the gap opens wider. By the time they've run about 10,000 miles, the electrodes are burned and worn, and voltage requirements have doubled. And if these plugs are not replaced, voltage required keeps going up until sudden acceleration increases requirements above availability, and the engine misfires. Replacement with new plugs will restore the reserve factor, but there are other conditions which can affect voltage requirements. The sparking end of plug works where it is constantly exposed to oil and the products of combustion. Deposits may form on the insulator, which, if allowed to build up heavily, give the circuit an easier path to take at a much lower voltage. This spark plug fouling causes the engine to misfire because there is no spark to ignite the fuel, a condition where voltage required, being so lazy it only works as hard as it must to complete the circuit, doesn't build up the voltage required for sparking. We might also mention that if the primary leads to the coil get switched, reversing polarity, voltage requirements will be increased about 40%, which on top of any other adverse factors can soon cause trouble unless corrected. Once again, we have first developed a situation as if for a one-cylinder engine. To get the complete picture, voltage requirements for each cylinder would have to be recorded separately, just as is done on modern electronic oscilloscopes, such as the plug scope, which simplify the job of checking ignition systems. With a graph or trace for each plug, any condition which affects voltage requirements will be reflected on the proper bar. For instance, if a plug has too wide a gap, its trace bar will show an increase in voltage requirements, in this case, bringing it above the reference line, a definite indication of unsatisfactory ignition performance. On the other hand, if a plug is fouled, its voltage required would drop, since what we actually see is the voltage required to leak to the ground, lower than what is required to jump the spark gap. On the scope, then, we can compare voltage requirements for all plugs. Voltage available can also be observed and compared by disconnecting any of the plug leads, thus forcing the lazy ignition system to put out as much voltage as it can. Then we have a direct comparison of available and required. If voltage available is lower than it should be, it is apparent that the ignition system should be checked for trouble. It could be that the breaker points are spaced too far apart, making the dwell angle too small. It could be the condenser. If it is not properly matched to the system, it can cut down voltage available and also cause transfer of metal at the points. The induction coil may be partially shorted. Dirty or burned contacts or connections may be cutting down voltage available. So, as time passes and the ignition system is given a harsh and hectic workout, there are many ways in which available voltage can be reduced, while voltage requirements creep up until our once strong system is sick, and the load it must bear is beyond its ability. Of course, major illness often can be prevented by looking for early symptoms before the illness becomes serious, by periodic checkups and tune-ups, something car owners seldom think of themselves unless it is suggested to them.
I like that. I wish it wasn't so long, but I enjoy the information and I enjoy the animation. It's definitely interesting to have it with a black background versus a white background. But Portafilms, I think they did Helping Johnny Remember. They also did Let's Play and Share Together, I believe, which we showed earlier this week. Yeah, and then they did these what we call sponsored films. And thanks for tuning in today. Very much appreciate it. If you like what you saw, you can hit the thumbs up button, the like button. You can hit the super thanks button, which is in YouTube's chat, the ko-fi.com/avgeeks or the patreon.com/avgeeks. Those are great ways to support us because we need support. We have a lot of rent that we're paying on storage units, and also we're buying some new shelving units. We're slowly working on making a space safer and for our employees and also for our films, because there's a nasty basement that gets damp and gross, and it's just not good for anybody. So that's what we're slowly working towards, is we're getting the films off site, and then we're going to fix the basement, and then we're going to put them back on site. That's the plan, and I'll have more details about that as they happen. But in the meantime, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow. I should say I've got 2 events coming up this weekend, but they're both sold out. So, and they're both based in Raleigh, so I don't know if it's going to help. One is on Friday at the Natural Science Museum. We're doing a screening along with their adult Halloween night, and we're showing 3 hours of films from our collection. And you've seen some of them, but they're all kind of horror, fantasy-based stuff. I actually scanned 2 of them during our show this week that you saw, Dr. Heidegger's Experiment and Red Room Riddle. Then on Saturday, I'm doing a 6-hour movie marathon at the Alamo Drafthouse. We're showing Dismember the Alamo, which is a bunch of mystery movies. So I can't tell you what they are, but they're awesome, and I will be there. So hopefully I will see you at either of those events. In the meantime, come back tomorrow. I've been uploading some more films, and so check those out. All right, take care. Talk soon. Bye.